Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Twisted Talks. I'm Tanya.
I'm Josh.
And today is going to be part 2 of the Bhopal Disaster or the Bhopal Gas Tragedy. So if you have not listened to part 1, I suggest you
check it out.
Skip back to last week.
Because you've missed very important information.
Yes, you won't understand anything that is going on. I barely understand what's going on, and I researched it. So take it away, Josh.
So in the last episode, we covered the way the MIC was being stored. Tanya covered the events of the plant the night of the tragedy,
as well as the kind of lead up to it with earlier issues.
And I kind of did a bit of history on
the background.
UCIL, who are the subsidiary of UCC that had even the Bhopal
basically
plant.
The companies that were involved.
Yes. So now jumping straight in, because she a chunky case, we haven't even figured out yet whether this is going to be the final part or whether there might need to be a part 3. So
we'll see.
Going back in and picking up from where we were is kind of the acute effects and the effects on the people nearby and everything straight away, pretty much. But actually, just to make it clear, because I didn't actually realise this, acute effects is also considered anywhere from the moment something happens, so 0 up to 6 months.
Oh.
And then it's 6 months onwards is considered the long-term effects, which Tanya will do later.
Yes.
So, now, covering the acute effects. An acute effect is a physiological reaction in the body resulting in severe symptoms that develop rapidly during short-term exposure to toxic chemicals or substances, in this case. The symptoms are dangerous and serious, but they often subside once the exposure to whatever chemical or substance stops. However, in some cases, acute exposure can cause sickness, serious injury, or even death within hours or days. Instances of these more serious outcomes from acute exposure are rare. I guess it depends on the chemical or substance and the severity of the exposure. But unfortunately, in the case of the Bhopal disaster, these rare outcomes were far from rare. So by 1:30 a.m. on the night of the disaster, around 30 tonnes of MIC had leaked out and entered the atmosphere, and in the next 2 hours it had made its way to nearby residential areas. Those living there inhaling the toxic gas. People began to fall unconscious, and within hours both people and animals started to die. By 7 a.m. on the 3rd of December 1984, 70 people had died as a result, and by 9 a.m. the number of people dead had reached 260.
Oh my god, that's a massive jump.
And the number of fatalities continued to rise.
Oh my god.
According to the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal, Union Carbide claimed that 3,800 people died that night. However, New Scientist magazine claim in their article, Fresh Evidence on Bhopal Disaster, which was published in early December 2002, that 8,000 people died in the first days, and as Tanya mentioned in the last episode, at least 150 people were seriously injured or left disabled from the leak.
I think I used those resources as well.
So handy. Some sources claim that the number of deaths within the first days were as high as 10,000. Now, definitive figures as to how many people died that night and in the immediate aftermath do not exist, and we will never know for sure how many people actually died. I'll get onto that. I'm sure I mentioned more to do with that later. In the days straight after the disaster, countless unidentified victims were quickly buried in mass graves and cremated on huge pyres.
That's awful. Indian
army trucks moved corpses to forests and rivers and dumped them there or brought them for mass burial in other cities. This is awful. As if it hasn't been all so far, but one of the International Campaign for Justice in Bhopal's first activist, a boy called Sunil, gained consciousness only to find himself among a pile of corpses in a town 20 miles away from Bhopal.
Oh my god.
Sunil was lucky not to be burnt alive among the dead.
Oh my god.
And this makes me wonder how many people may have been burnt alive because authorities thought they were dead.
Oh my fucking god.
Yeah.
That is like one of the ultimate levels of trauma.
Yeah. No, it's just that hit me when I was doing the research there. There are so many victim accounts about what happened to them and their family and friends that awful night and how it affected them and their health in the following days, weeks, months, or even years if there was long-term effects for some people.
Days, weeks, or months, or even years, but how they live
oh yeah.
You. But Union Carbide won't. They will not
yeah.
be there for you.
Mm-hmm. And many who died that night were not even counted in the death toll, as their death could not be proven, as the surviving family members did not have the requisite documents.
For fuck's sake.
People were injured and died in stampedes as everyone attempted to escape the deadly gas. One man lost sight of his daughter during a stampede and never saw her again, but without papers, he could not prove to authorities that she ever existed in the first place.
Oh my god.
So like you can tell like the death toll is completely wrong because that's only the amount of people considered.
Who weren't able to bring documentation with them or who weren't able to obtain documentation.
Or maybe, yeah.
And this was just like another way that they were kind of pushed to the side when it came to
and like that's why so
and
many estimates are up to 10,000 people because they're trying to consider the amount of people that were not like officially counted. The acute effects in this instance from immediately to 6 months after the gas leak included ocular effects, meaning the eyes or vision, such as redness, watering, ulcers.
Ulcers on your eyes. I remember seeing that's on the cornea specifically. I think it said like that is pain.
Chemosis, which is swelling of the eye surface membranes due to an accumulation of fluid. And photophobia, which is when the eyes are very sensitive to certain levels of light, resulting in discomfort and bright lighting. Respiratory effects such as respiratory distress, which causes low blood oxygen levels. Pulmonary edema, which is a build-up of fluid in the lungs. Pneumonitis, which is a general term referring to the inflammation of lung tissue. And pneumothorax, which is the presence of air or gas in the space between the lungs and the chest wall, causing a collapse of the lung. Or lungs, maybe, for some people. Gastrointestinal effects, such as persistent diarrhea, anorexia, and persistent abdominal pain. Now, just to clarify on the anorexia one, obviously that can be an eating disorder as well, but in this case, it's literally a case of one of their symptoms was a case where they just had no appetite as a result. So I suppose it's more like chemical exposure induced anorexia. Those are just the main physical acute effects. There were also, as you can imagine, serious acute and long-term psychological and neurobehavioural effects, such as anxiety, depression, impaired audio and visual memory, impaired attention and response time, and impaired reasoning and spatial ability. In terms of more about what happened to people and how the healthcare system coped with the tragedy and so on, I will get more into that in my next section. But for now, Tanya, on to you.
So I'm going to be talking about what the gas cloud was made of, so what these people were actually inhaling. So in my research, I wasn't able to find a definitive composition for the gas cloud, and apparently part of this is because Union Carbide and their affiliates and subsidiaries and whatever haven't actually released the information.
And you know the worst thing I think is, in terms of with some instances, not all, I actually think a lot of the subsidiaries, especially UCIL, didn't even 100% know because they were not being informed by UCC. They were just being told what to do, but not what they were necessarily working with.
Exactly. Now, it's thought that cyanide was among the chemicals released, as according to the chief engineer of UC at the time, quote, MIC breaks down to several gases, among them hydrocyanide acid at very high temperatures, end quote. And workers who had been around the tank during the leak did report the smell of bitter almonds, which is commonly emitted by cyanide. Now, I did see as well, I'll mention it later, that this was kind of disproven, but as well, I'm pretty sure, is it not quite, it's one of those like genetic traits, being able to smell cyanide. Like, not everyone can smell it.
I don't actually know.
I do think so.
But
take
potentially.
It with a pinch of salt,
but I suppose it's the same with, I suppose, nearly everything. Even things that everyone can smell, there's always going to be people that just won't notice the smell.
Now, doctors who treated people affected by the leak first assumed it was a phosgene leak, though this was later shot down by Union Carbide, who said it was impossible as the facility did not store phosgene. But as I said earlier, a worker died in 1981 after coming into contact with phosgene.
Yeah, so just because they don't store it doesn't mean it wasn't in the concoctions in the tanks that leaked. Well, the tank that leaked.
They were pumping it into the methyl isocyanate to prevent polymerization.
Yeah, so like, you might not be storing it, but it's contained in your cocktail inside the tank that leaked all over the place.
So, based on laboratory simulations as described in The Black Box of Bhopal, written by former UCC employee, this is such a great name, Themistocles de Silva.
I love it.
Themistocles.
It sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel.
So, Themistocles de Silva, he wrote this book in 2006, or it was published in 2006, and according to good old Themistocles, The cloud was most likely comprised of chloroform, dichloromethane, hydrogen chloride, methylamine, dimethylamine, trimethylamine, and carbon dioxide that was either present in the tank already or was a byproduct of the reaction between the methyl isocyanate, chloroform, and water. According to De Silva, lab investigations performed by the CSIR, or the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, and UCC scientists failed to prove the presence of hydrogen cyanide.
Okay.
So it was most likely the methyl isocyanate, chloroform, dichloromethane, hydrogen chloride, methylamine, dimethylamine, trimethylamine, and carbon dioxide.
Okay. So the cyanide potentially wasn't there. But then again, just because you failed to prove something doesn't mean it wasn't there.
And I would be a bit hesitant when it's the UCC scientists.
Yes, that too. So, as you can imagine, right after the disaster, questions were being asked: what caused such a catastrophic disaster? What could be done for those who were now seriously ill as a result? And the one with the obvious answer: who was responsible? Well, obviously maybe not the obvious answer at the time, but given what we know from the research, it's the obvious answer. Immediately after the gas leak, the Indian government closed the Bhopal plant to any and all outsiders, including UCC. However, the Indian government then failed to make data public, which contributed to the confusion surrounding what had happened. The Indian organisations, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, or CSIR, and the Central Bureau of Investigation conducted the initial investigation. Warren Anderson, the UCC chairman and CEO of UCC, I was about to repeat myself, immediately travelled to India with a technical team. Once he arrived in India, he was placed under house arrest and urged by the Indian government to leave India within 24 hours.
Okay, a bit extreme.
Is it though?
I'm sorry, I missed what you said. I was thinking about something. I just heard that he was placed under house arrest. Who is he?
The UCC chairman and CEO.
Oh.
He travelled to India with a technical team, and once he arrived in India was placed under house arrest and urged by the Indian government to leave.
We strongly urge you to go the fuck home.
Get out. Union Carbide organised a team of international medical experts, supplies and equipment to work alongside the local Bhopal medical community, which I mean is the least they could do when it's clearly them to blame. The people that could not flee headed for the hospitals. The healthcare system became overloaded instantly. The statistics here are ridiculous.
Okay, go on.
Like, we complain about the HSE being busy. Well, then again, I'd hate to see the HSE try and deal with something like this.
Stop, Josh. Stop.
Let's not.
We won't go there. There would be beds out in the car park. There would. You know there would.
But, you know, in a situation like this, as long as they're getting the treatment, even if it's in the car park, you could understand it. But the HSE wouldn't even have room in the car park.
I know.
At Bhopal's Hamidia Hospital, which had 1,200 beds, the first patient with eye trouble checked in or presented at around 1:15 a.m. the night of the tragedy. Within 5 minutes, there were 1,000 patients.
Oh my God.
And by 2:30 a.m. there were 4,000 suffering from not only eye ailments but from respiratory problems. Obviously, the hospital staff first response was understandably shock and bewilderment.
Yeah,
that is probably not how they expected their night to go. At this stage, nobody really knew what to do. They did not know the proper treatment for MIC gas inhalation, and Union Carbide were not giving any useful information.
Of course they weren't.
No, why would they do that?
It wouldn't benefit them.
Hamidia Hospital being only about 3 kilometres.
I'm sorry, I keep thinking that you were saying chlamydia.
No, I'm not.
I apologise.
You dirty, dirty bitch.
I am ashamed.
Hamidia Hospital, being only about 3 kilometres from the factory site, was not safe from the effects of the gas either. Numerous hospital staff members were also soon overwhelmed by the gas and had to be replaced by a new medical team.
Oh my God.
Journalists, it's one thing after the other, Journalists who visited the hospital at 2:30 a.m. reported only seeing one doctor, and that doctor had no medicine to treat patients.
Jesus Christ.
All night up until the early morning, there were very few doctors, and medical students from nearby hostels were actually filling in. But I suppose in the circumstances, even if all the doctors were there, you'd still call the med students in. There were so many victims that there were army trucks bringing them to the hospitals. Many people, and especially small children, were breathing their last breaths due to no treatment being available. Even when the medicines needed were available and treatment began, it was only to relieve symptoms where possible and not an actual fix. Treatments such as eye ointments or injections to lessen the spasms that people were experiencing due to their trachea constricting.
Jesus.
By sunrise, hundreds, if not thousands, lay dead on roads and in their homes, some beginning to decompose, attracting vultures and stray dogs.
Oh my God.
Because, as most people are probably aware, there is a lot of stray dogs in India. It's quite sad. 2,000 more lay dying in hospitals and homes. The severely swollen carcasses of hundreds of cattle and other animals were all over the gas-affected areas.
Oh my God.
And remember I said Hamidia Hospital had 1,200 beds?
Yeah.
It didn't take long before the hospital was packed with around 25,000 people. The hospital
oh my God.
Yeah. The hospital floor splattered with blood and vomit. A doctor working at Hamidia said, quote, "I was standing in the paediatric department. There was such a terrible crowd." Obviously, I would also like to say about this quote, it's not 100% accurate because there was grammar corrections and things I changed. So yeah, he said he was standing in the paediatric department. There was such a terrible crowd that there wasn't even a place to keep bodies on the floor. As soon as a patient was declared dead, their relatives would just vanish with the body. I saw at least 50 bodies taken away like this. I would estimate that anything between 500 and 1,000 bodies were taken away before their deaths could even be registered.
Oh my God.
It was difficult. It was a difficult task for survivors to identify the dead, and it was even harder to differentiate between the dead and the half-dead. The mortuary, how do you pronounce that? Mortuary? Staff were unable to cope and weren't able to do post-mortems. I suppose, how do you keep up with that? There were mass funerals and cremations. At the Hindu cremation ground, there were about 15 pyres lit at any one time. The crematoriums even ran out of firewood and trucks had to be assembled to bring in more.
Oh my God.
To save time, it's just worse and worse and worse. To save time, money, energy and human power, 5 to 10 people were being cremated on each pyre. So if 10 people were cremated on each pyre and there was 15 pyres burning at any time, that's up to 150 people being cremated at any one time.
Oh my God.
In accordance with Hindu rites, children and infants were hastily buried by a group of gravediggers. At the Muslim burial ground, there wasn't enough space to bury the number of bodies being brought there. Rescue workers had to dig graves to hold 11 bodies each.
Oh my God.
When there was no room left for fresh graves, old tombs had to be opened, displacing the old bones already there to make room for the bodies of the victims. They literally had no space.
This is awful. And it's the fact that, like, these people, this is not something that they wanted to do. This is out of necessity.
It was necessity. It was
and
like we don't have the time nor the space.
I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure on like Muslim culture and
there was.
culture,
I was going to mention there was like a certain type of thing that like legally had to be done by someone in the religious community to allow those old graves to be done.
Yeah, because I would imagine like the guilt that these people carry for like having to disturb the peace of these dead people to land someone else.
But there was no choice.
But they had no other option.
Yeah, so it's just one thing after another. There were even packs of dogs prowling the burial ground, and if a grave wasn't deep enough, they would get the bodies out to eat.
Oh my God.
Within only a few days, trees in the area were barren. The bloated carcasses of animals had to be disposed of. Around 2,000 animals were gathered and buried. Around 170,000 people were treated at hospitals and other temporary locations in place to treat victims. Supplies were scarce due to supplier safety fears, and fishing was prohibited, causing even more supply shortages. As there were still an estimated 15 tonnes of MIC left in tank E611 and residual amounts left in tank E619, a plan was put in place to empty the tanks by using the remaining MIC to create... Was the 50? Yeah, anyway. Was it E611 or E610? Either way, it was in one of the tanks, okay? To remaining MIC, a plan was put in place to empty the tanks in the only way that I suppose they safely could, which was by using the remaining MIC to create more 7 pesticide as the risk of another gas leak was increasing daily. This plan was named Operation Fate. Operation Fate was set for the 16th of December 1984. The operation was announced to the public 3 days prior on the 13th. Preparations were made before the operation went ahead, such as meticulous safety precautions being put in place in the factory area, safety systems being repaired, and a communication system and a risk management control organisation was developed. This included bringing back UCIL operators and giving them the training to work under unusual circumstances.
Oh, so they'll actually train them?
Yeah, because something's already happened, they can't let it get any worse. You know, but let it happen once and then we'll do something.
Yeah, and then we'll implement some...
Because the world is watching.
Yeah.
The chief minister at the time decided to stay at the plant for the operation, and he deliberately created an atmosphere of panic so that his decision to be there would look more heroic.
Oh, of course, fuck off.
Yeah. The plan was to evacuate around 80,000 people living in relatively open structures to safe places, and all educational institutes were closed. The government put an alarm system in place to alert of any imminent leakage, and the public were advised to go into closed buildings if an alert sounded and use wet towels over their faces to filter the air for breathing. Because that's a magic cure.
Brilliant.
As you can imagine, the people of Bhopal did not trust the authorities, and they did not think the site chosen by the government to be safe. On various types of vehicles with all their belongings, people began leaving the town, and of course the rich and the elite were the first to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Priorities, disgusting. The amount of MIC that was processed during the operation was 22 tonnes, almost 50% more than UCC experts had estimated remained in the plant. Do UCC know anything at all about their own plants and subsidiaries?
Clearly fucking not.
In March of 1985, the Indian government enacted the Bhopal Gas Disaster Act as a way of making sure that claims arising from the accident would be dealt with quickly and fairly. This act made the Indian government the sole representative of the victims in legal proceedings both within and outside of India.
Yeah, I had seen that as well in my research for my next section.
Because you've got the main legal stuff.
Section left.
Is that long?
A little bit.
It'll be grand. There's definitely going to have to be a part 3, I'm thinking, at this point.
Be grand.
But anyway, there were widespread complaints of lack of information or misinformation going about. An Indian government spokesperson voiced their opinion that, quote, Carbide is more interested in getting information from us than in helping our relief work, unquote. Dead right. Even when the doctors that had been sent from Union Carbide Corporation turned up in Bhopal, they didn't give any information. So, they were gatekeeping.
Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss.
Within a few days of the disaster, formal statements were released stating that air, water, vegetation and food items were safe everywhere in the city. I find that extremely hard to believe.
I'm sure they are.
Anywho, television features informed people that poultry was not affected, but did warn people not to eat fish. Understandably, people were confused on what was safe to consume and what was not. It was also an open secret, so wasn't really much of a secret, that deliveries of fresh vegetables and fruit from the government farm at Pakmari, a hill resort near Bhopal, but not in Bhopal, were arriving from ministers and senior bureaucrats.
Oh, but not for the poor.
No.
Not for the middle class and lower
So that's
class.
far from reassuring for the people of Bhopal that high-up government members were getting their produce from elsewhere.
Shit,
Do you know,
shit like that just boils me.
if I was a resident of Bhopal, I would wonder why they aren't eating the produce that's within Bhopal. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have the access to a place you know is going to have fresher food, I'm not judging you for getting it, because, look, anyone who if you had a private farm yourself outside, you would probably use it. Any decent human being would probably also share it.
Yeah.
But
if you know that the produce is not safe in your area to the point that you're getting stuff shipped in, it's kind of like a moral obligation.
But now,
it
is saying that it was safe, and there's nothing so far to contradict that yet. But I'm assuming there will be in terms of long-term effects and things like that, and drinking water for sure, I'd imagine.
We'll get there when we get there.
But there we shall get. Within weeks of the disaster, the state government had established numerous hospitals, clinics and mobile units in the gas-affected area to treat the victims. At least 200,000 children had been exposed to the gases.
Oh my God,
So, that's children alone, that's not even adults.
Yeah. So now kind of moving on to the legal action and the legal case. So in February 1985, the Indian government filed a suit with the US court against the Union Carbide Corporation. The suit asked for $3.3 billion for the victims and people affected by the leak, which is, I think, the bare minimum.
Yeah, to be fair, I'm they could ask for whatever they want, and considering the amount of victims and the amount of long-term damage,
they should get it.
It should be gone.
So a month later, in March, the Bhopal Gas Disaster Processing of Claims Act was passed, as Josh mentioned. And as Josh said already, this allowed the central government to become the sole representative of all victims in all cases brought against UC in order to protect the interests of the victims and to ensure a speedy process.
I wonder as well, though, in regards to that, I'm was there ulterior motive from the government? Because, we can't always trust governments. But also, I guess at the same time, even if there was ulterior motives, it probably makes it easier for a lot of the victims who probably can't afford legal aid I don't know, legal counsel. That's the word I'm looking for.
So I'm going to say nothing.
Because it's yet to come.
In 1986, the proceedings in the US district were transferred to India on the grounds of forum non-convenience, which just means that the case should be transferred somewhere more convenient to allow for the trial to run smoothly. Excuse me. In 1987, cases were filed in the Bhopal District Court, which ordered UCC to pay 350 crores. Now, a crore is equal to 10 million, so this is 350 million. As interim compensation, but as this was not an official order by the courts, UCC refused to pay. Later on in the High Court, this amount was decreased to 250 crores or 250 million, and both the Union of India and UCC appealed this by special leave against the High Court's order. Now, the real twist in this case came when the Indian government and the Union Carbide Corporation worked out a settlement order in February 1989. The out-of-court settlement amounted to $470 million. Now, bear in mind, they had asked for $3.3 billion.
470 million, was it?
Mm-hmm. And part of the settlement order was that this was a fixed amount to UCC's liability, meaning that any and all future claims, whether civil or criminal, would be subject to limited liability, and Union Carbide would only be held liable to the extent of the already agreed upon $470 million. Yeah. The actual wording is as follows. Quote, "This settlement shall finally dispose of all past, present and future claims, causes of action and civil and criminal proceedings of any nature, whatsoever, wherever pending, by all Indian citizens and all public and private entities with respect to all past, present and future deaths, personal injuries, health effects, compensation, losses, damages and civil and criminal complaints of any nature whatsoever against UCC, Union Carbide India Limited, Union Carbide Eastern and all of their subsidiaries and affiliates, as well as each of their present and former directors, officers, employees, agents, representatives, attorneys, advocates and solicitors arising out of, relating to or concerned with the Bhopal gas leak disaster, including past, present and future claims, causes of actions and proceedings against each other."
Can I just... Shit, I can't remember what I was going to say, so can I just say it? Apparently not. What was I going to say?
Was it about how they really made sure...
I was going to say, because I was... to do with, like... I know, obviously, judges' jobs and stuff, and obviously depending on the courts and things like that, are obviously to make these big rulings and, like, figure shit out and, like, try and find, I suppose, the best way to deal with everything at once. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, at the same time, I'm like, I appreciate that that's their job, but I also sit here and I'm like, who the fuck are you to rule that nobody else involved can make a claim at any point or given time?
And especially when it was so fresh.
This was what, 4 years I know after? Obviously that money is to be divided out between, but the amount of victims, I can't see 470 million between that many victims and other things being that much per person.
So obviously with the magnitude of this incident, $470 million was not enough to compensate everyone who was affected.
What a fucking surprise!
Now, several claims and appeals were filed, citing that the settlement should be voided due to the victims not being consulted prior to agreement.
Which is true, they should, or at least, like, as many victims as possible should be able to, like, what's the word? When you put someone forward...
Put their case forward, basically.
Like, not even put their case forward, but, like, choose the representative.
Yes. In
order to deal with whether that seems like a fair agreement to come to or not.
Now, they also cited the fact that the order applied to any future claims and the absence of a reopener clause, as this would oppose public policy and prevent anyone with genuine claims from getting justice. The latency period for the manifestation of the effects of this incident was unpredictable, and it was highly possible that people would be dealing with the fallout for years with no route for justice. All of these claims and appeals were rejected by the Supreme Court, and the validity of the settlement was upheld on October 3rd, 1991, with the court being of the opinion that the deal was not illegal and there was no valid reason put forward to render the agreement void. So in addition to that, what I suppose would be classed as a civil suit, there were also criminal proceedings, and these were initiated in 1987 before the Chief Magistrate in Bhopal, and judgment was not delivered until June 7th, 2010, which is 26 years later. The criminal suit was brought under Section 304A, which deals with death caused by negligence, Sections 336, 337 and 338, which deal with offences of endangering life and the personal safety of others, and Section 35, which deals with the aspects of common intention, and these are all sections of the Indian Penal Code.
Yeah.
The prosecution argued that the entire incident was caused by the running of a defectively designed plant with a number of operational defects that was operating without any reasonable care. They submitted the findings of the CSIR. I can't remember what that was.
CSIR, was that the Scientific Institute of Research?
The Central Scientific Institute of Research, or something like that. And they submitted the findings of the CSRI to substantiate their claims. Now, I won't be delving into the actual findings of the report just yet. We'll come to that later, because it should definitely be discussed in detail. But UCC argued that the CSIR was merely a fact-finding body and that their report should not be allowed to be submitted as evidence. Now, in the end, the accused were found guilty, which was UCC, and there was a couple of people sentenced to imprisonment and a fine, but these orders could not be enforced as they didn't turn up to court.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Warren Anderson, who was the chairman of the Union Carbide Corporation at the time,
and also CEO,
is still facing extradition requests, which remain unsuccessful as the US government rejects them. And I think you had told me, was it he resigned not too long after
He
this?
resigned in 1986, so around the same times. And also, what was that last part again about still?
So, like, he's still facing extradition
Well,
requests.
he's not anymore because he's dead.
Oh, sorry. Well, he was facing extradition requests up until the time of his death.
When did he die? I think I have that thrown in somewhere at some stage, so we'll get to that then. And I can confirm that this is definitely going to be a three-parter. I think this is going to be the last section for this episode. So, after the settlement, survivor advocacy groups felt that Warren Anderson had been as good as let off the hook by the Indian Supreme Court, and as Tanya mentioned, as they had ruled that he had to pay a civil settlement of $470 million and in exchange would not have to face any criminal or legal charges against him or UCC. Now, before I continue, can I just say this man or his company shouldn't be in a position to exchange anything. Pay the money and face the consequences, not just pay the money and strut off into the sunset.
Exactly. Especially with what we've just learned happened in the hospitals and the mass graves and everything. Like, justice should be upheld. Yeah.
However, in 1991, a different judge in the Indian Supreme Court decided that after further review, amnesty from criminal prosecution was not connected to resolution of a civil suit after all, and warrants for Union Carbide and Warren Anderson were reissued. Woohoo. The charges being culpable homicide, which is when an unlawful act results in the death of a person or people, but it does not amount to murder. Culpable homicide carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. Anderson, actually, just a little snippet. Anderson had the audacity to declare in 1985 that, quote, "Maybe I wish to be remembered for resolving an issue like Bhopal," unquote.
Oh, because you resolved it. You resolved it well, Warren.
Yeah, but yet was unwilling to go on trial in India when he summoned. And okay, fair enough. It's very unlikely that any judge in his case in India could be unbiased when it comes to such a huge disaster that could have been avoided. But I still don't think the ruling that may have been given would have been unreasonable given the severity of what happened.
I agree.
And again, with all charges, there's a maximum sentence as well. So. Interesting though that when he thought there would be no consequences, when he was such a good guy resolving the Bhopal issue. Excuse me now, but fuck off.
Get fucked. You can't.
So, seeing as Warren Anderson did not show up in court in the culpable homicide case, which he was named the chief defendant in, he was declared a fugitive from justice by the Chief Judicial Magistrate of Bhopal on the 1st of February 1992. Orders were then passed to the Indian government to push for the extradition of Anderson from the United States. However, the United States refused to extradite him and gave lack of evidence as their reason for declining the extradition.
Lack of evidence? Are you having a laugh?
Yeah, lack of evidence who? Do you know what I mean? But again, I suppose that's probably just typical fucking, sorry, but if you're American, but that sounds like, well, actually, no, if you're American, you probably know exactly what I'm about to say. That's probably typical US government protecting the rich in their own country because they care about the rich because money and taxes or tax evasion, actually. But anyway, so they did not extradite him. In 1996, the Indian Supreme Court reduced the charges from culpable homicide to criminal negligence, which reduces the maximum sentence from 10 years to 2. However, in 2002, the Chief, clean your kitchen today. The Chief Judicial Magistrate Court reaffirmed that Warren Anderson stood accused of culpable homicide and directed the Indian government to secure the extradition of Anderson and Carbide representatives to face trial in India. In June of 2010, 7 former senior employees of UCC's subsidiary, UCIL, many in their 70s at this point, and all Indian nationals were convicted on charges of debt by negligence for their roles in the tragedy. Each of them were sentenced to 2 years imprisonment and fined 100,000 rupees each, which would now be the equivalent of roughly $3,026 or €2,820. All 7 were released on bail soon after the verdict. Oh yeah, on 29th of September 2014, Warren Anderson died at 92 years of age. And yeah.
Get fucked, Warren Anderson.
You know, I'm like, fuck off. Don't like to speak ill of the dead, but fuck off. Stay there.
Died.
How
sad.
And yeah, I guess, is your next section long or is it a short one? We might have time.
Let me see.
Oh,
No, we'll get it.
We'll get it.
So, just talking about the long-term health effects. So, in JP Nagar, which is described as a ramshackle neighbourhood on the outskirts of Bhopal, so it would have been one of the basties. It's so close to the Union Carbide plant that 67-year-old Amwati Yadav can see it from her roof. She says, quote, "It would be better if there was another gas leak which would kill us all and put us all out of this misery. 35 years we have suffered through this. Please just let it end. This is not life. This is not death. We are in the terrible place in between." Now I did see Amwati's grandsons were all born with cerebral palsy and muscular dystrophy, and she said at one point that they don't even know if it's day or night.
Yeah. And I assume that links to the
it does
xenobiotic thing that I was on about and whatever earlier.
So there's much dispute regarding the official death toll of the Bhopal gas leak, but it's estimated that around 574,000 people were poisoned and upwards of 20,000 people have died of related conditions in the years since. Now, as per this article, now I got most of this information from a Guardian article that was written in 2019. Even before the incident, Union Carbide was dumping toxic waste into the surrounding areas, and there has never been a clean-up of this waste or of the leak site. Surveys done by Bhopal campaign groups show toxic waste containing 6 persistent organic pollutants, which are currently banned by the UN due to their highly poisonous impacts on both the environment and human beings. According to this article, this waste has spread to 42 areas in Bhopal and is continuing to spread. And according to data collected by the Sambhavna Trust, beginning in 2010, the mortality rates for gas-exposed victims are 23% higher than average. They are twice as likely to die of cancer, diseases of the lungs and tuberculosis, and 3 times more likely to die of kidney diseases, and 63% more likely to have illnesses overall. Their data also showed that almost a quarter of gas-exposed victims were diagnosed with an underactive thyroid, which can have devastating effects on your long-term health. Their studies also showed devastating long-term effects on women who were exposed to the gas, even if they were just babies at the time of exposure. The women studied showed higher rates of infertility, higher rates of stillbirths, miscarriages, early menopause and menstrual-related issues, and this actually led to many husbands in Bhopal abandoning their wives, like almost seeing them as not fit for purpose.
Oh, yeah, because it's a product you bought at half price in Tesco's.
They couldn't fulfil their family duties, we'll say.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
You don't deserve a wife.
So the leak continues to affect families in Bhopal, even generations on. The Chingari Children's Centre has been set up for those born with disabilities as a result of the gas leak. The centre has registered over 1,000 children, and most are affected by cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, autism, intellectual disabilities and severe learning difficulties. Rashida B, such a great name, Rashida B.
It sounds like a rap name almost.
Who founded the centre, says, quote, "This is the terrible legacy of Bhopal. All of these children were born to parents or even grandparents who were in contact with the gas that night. The situation is getting worse, not better. We are seeing more and more second and third generation children being born with such disabilities and coming here. Bhopal's tragedy has not stopped."
It's awful. And that's the end of that
I
one,
suppose
is it?
that's the
I
end
suppose,
of
well,
this
I can fit in
episode.
my next one.
Go on then.
Because it's only a paragraph, and we're doing good for time.
Yeah.
Well,
I think the next episode should be kind of short enough. Like, I'd say it maybe be half an hour, so...
Yeah, well, we'll try and get it to the mark because opinions. So...
That works.
The Indian government had mainly focused on increasing hospital-based services for gas victims, therefore new hospitals were built after the disaster. We briefly said that already anyway. In 1991, UCC wanted to sell its shares in UCIL and was ordered by the Supreme Court of India to finance a 500-bed hospital for the medical care of the survivors. So this led to the inauguration of the Bhopal Memorial Hospital and Research Centre in 1998, and the hospital was obliged to give free treatment to survivors for 8 years, so the free healthcare for the survivors was to be offered until 2006, and after that I guess you better have money or find a different charity service or something, I don't know. But I could be wrong, maybe that place could be funded by a charity now as well since 2006, but I didn't find much about if there was still free healthcare there after 2006. And yes,
I suppose that's this episode.
That is this episode done. Finito. But so guys, once again, thank you for listening. It's a rough one and a long one. So we will get into what's next.
The environmental rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So I'll be
starting.
starting.
So rehabilitations in various forms, yeah. Other impacts and causes, things like the theories about corporate negligence versus employee sabotage, things like that, and other little bits and pieces, and to do with activism and things like that. So tune in for part 3.
Yeah, we'll speak to you again
This
soon.
is the first 3-parter we've ever done.
I think so, yeah.
Now, I know we're trying to stick to the 45, so realistically the Jeffrey Dahmer case probably would have been a 3 or 4-parter if we'd done the 45.
Time, yeah.
But yeah, so guys, thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye. Ciao.